Getting to the heart of the matter. Back to Guy, Ben, and Frank with more Inside the News.
Welcome back to our third segment of Inside the News, the election trail. And we've only got about another 10 days to 2 weeks to talk about the election trail. And we'll be talking about it again next week after the election. And we probably won't know who's going to be the president until maybe December 1st or January 1st. Who knows what's going to happen? It could be a big red wave or a blue ditch. Okay, Frank, take off. Go.
One of the interesting aspects of the 2020 election is the concept of party loyalty. Look, let's be blunt. Clearly, we are all tend to be more towards the right of center, so our views are conservative. But if you take an objective look over the past 4 years, we've seen an economy that's taken off and done great. We've seen an American military restored to power, making this nation safer. On the other hand, we see on the left a move to increase division between the races, between the peoples of this country. And you have to wonder, considering that the Biden-Kamala Harris ticket is not particularly attractive, why it's even competitive, why it is doing so well in the polls. And the answer is a problem that George Washington talked about in the 1790s. The danger of party loyalty exceeding loyalty to the United States of America. Far too often, particularly within the Democratic Party, we see individuals believe that what's good for the Democratic Party is more important than what's good for the United States of America. Clearly, the Democratic Party of today is not the Democratic Party of Harry Truman or John F. Kennedy. Indeed, John F. Kennedy would have to run as a Republican if he were around today. When we look at the various polls, it's indicative, I believe, of people voting more for the party than for the candidate. Joe Biden has real problems. The fact is he's over the hill mentally. His positions are really antiquated. They haven't worked in the past. They couldn't work in the future. But he still commands the loyalty of so many, not because of his views, not because of his personality, whatever there is of it, but because he's the standard bearer of the Democratic Party. What most Democrats don't seem to understand, is that the party has left them. This is not the Democratic Party. This is the Socialist Party. And whether that fact gets down into their heads, whether they realize that when they go into that voting booth and pull that lever for the D line, is going to determine how this election turns out. But this is not your father's Democratic Party.
You know, Ben, Frank nailed this one, because if you looked at the basic makeup of the Democratic Party, I would maybe say 10 to 15% are on that socialist, way left wing of the party. And the majority are right there in that pocket of what Frank was talking about. We're the Democratic Party, we're Democrats. But what they're voting for is really what they voted for 30 years ago. And it's maybe passed down to the next generation. And they're unwilling to put an R in front of the name. But if they looked at policy and looked exactly what was going on, Donald Trump bears out everything that they want, and Joe Biden still thinks he's running against George Bush.
You know, you just read my mind, because the reality is, if you take the names and labels off, it is Donald Trump who has the policies and has implemented the policies in favor of the working class in this country, and benefiting the working class that was the hallmark of the Democratic Party of 40 odd years ago. The peace now, the anti-war movement, these are Donald Trump positions. You notice that there's been zero discussion on foreign affairs in this entire campaign, because they're so favorable to Donald Trump. And he hasn't really pivoted to them. He hasn't had the opportunity to, but he has ended the commitment to these ongoing wars in the Middle East that has cost trillions of dollars of American taxpayer money. It has weakened and drained the military. The rebuilding and refurbishing of our military has come about as a result of their ability to pause and take a break and bring troops home and allow them to rest and refit, which is so critical, and to rebuild our units and our depleted and wasted personnel and military equipment. This is crucial. He has a massive peace initiative underway in the Middle East with Israel and Arab nations. Sudan has joined that now. This is a sea change in what's going on. And his trade policies clearly are aligned towards the working class, and were the goals of Democrats, again, just 30, 40 years ago. And yet he gets no credit for this.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side, the Democratic Party has moved hard left. All of the energy, all the enthusiasm, the future of the party is with people like Ilhan Omar and AOC. They are young socialists. They are globalists. They are progressive. They hate this country. They want it to be subsumed into the United Nations. And the older parts of the party, the Joe Bidens, the Nancy Pelosi's, Nancy's 80 years old now. They're going to die off very soon. The Chuck Schumers of the party. And what's going to be left is this fringe radical socialist cabal that has taken over the future of the Democratic Party. And as Frank said perfectly, this is purely an issue of whether voters recognize that this is what has already happened. This is not a future trend. This is a current reality in the Democratic Party. And yet it's just been covered up around the edges in order to try to get Biden into the White House.
Frank, we have seen and Ben illuminated this beautifully about what's going on in foreign policy. A lot of this has been like under the radar, and things are happening in the Middle East, the peace initiatives. We're not seeing talk about the Afghanistan war like we used to. We're not seeing a lot of these wars around the world like we used to. And even North Korea has pretty much been taken off of the front headlines, and the Democrats are just stirring up all this trouble. But Donald Trump has been able to get things done subtly that we're not worried about war like we used to.
Well, Ben put it perfectly when he said that the foreign affairs has simply vanished from the campaign trail. When you look at the way the debates were structured, both the two presidential debates and the one vice presidential debate, foreign affairs made absolutely no appearance whatsoever. I think it's the first time in the history of campaigning in the United States over the past, 100 years, that foreign affairs was kept out of the campaign trail simply because it is so favorable to the incumbent, Donald Trump. The policies that the Democrats espouse have failed miserably over the past couple of decades. When the Democrats have been in power, we've seen an increase in terrorism, an increase in foreign power, a decrease in American influence, a decrease in American strength. This is something that should have been one of the topics that dominated the 2020 presidential race, but instead was totally absent. If you needed a more clear indication of media bias, and frankly, the bias on the part of the moderators, you couldn't come with a better topic than the lack of discussion of foreign affairs in the 2020 campaign.
You wonder if these moderators did not want to go there because they're not that well versed in it. A simple question to you, Ben.
Well, they just didn't want to go there because it was so favorable to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And so it's been ignored. And for whatever reason, the Trump campaign has not been able to elevate the issue because there's been a focus. This whole campaign has been domestically focused because of COVID and our economy. So that's the bottom line.
All right, Picking Up the Pieces is next, and we're going to talk about Amy Coney Barrett and her confirmation. This is Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio Inside the News. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio Inside the News.